8 U.S. warships surrounded Venezuela. Maduro just made the biggest mistake of his political career. Venezuelan fighter jets flew just a few meters over a U.S. destroyer in international waters. The Pentagon's reaction was shocking, while Maduro kept provoking the American government. The reality is, what started as political rhetoric turned into concrete military action, and that move may have triggered something way bigger than just a simple anti-drug operation. So stick with me, because I'm going to show you how this move may have sealed the fate of the Venezuelan regime and given Donald Trump the perfect excuse to destroy Nicolas Maduro. On the morning of September 2nd, U.S. military forces carried out what they called a precision strike against a vessel in the southern Caribbean. According to Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and confirmed by President Trump himself, the boat was carrying drugs and came from Venezuela. What made this event extraordinary was the decision to completely destroy the vessel, killing all 11 people on board. The Trump administration said the target was linked to the Tren de Aragua, a Venezuelan gang blamed for violence and drug trafficking in several American cities. The president even shared the dramatic video of the explosion on his social media, describing the operation as necessary to fight what he called narco-terrorists. The big question is, why sink instead of capture? That decision opened up an unprecedented international legal debate. International law experts questioned the legality of the move, especially since it was the first time U.S. forces had killed alleged traffickers in international waters in such a direct way. Caracas didn't take long to respond. For 2 days straight, Venezuelan military aircraft buzzed the USS Jason Dunham, an Arleigh Burke-class American destroyer equipped with the Aegis system. In international waters, the aircraft were identified as Venezuelan F-16 fighters doing what the military calls a close pass, a calculated show of force meant to prove presence. This kind of maneuver is insanely dangerous. When fighter jets fly close to warships, especially missile-armed destroyers, the margin for human error drops to almost zero. A misread move, a communication failure, or a faulty sensor could turn a show of force into an international incident with devastating consequences. On top of that, the Venezuelan government mobilized over 4 million militiamen in response to U.S. naval activity in the region. President Nicolas Maduro said he's ready to declare a nation in arms if U.S. forces attack Venezuelan territory. But the escalation didn't stop there. It went up another level with a decision that completely changed the military landscape in the region. 10 F-35 Lightning II fighters were sent to Puerto Rico as part of the operation against drug cartels. And this isn't just any aircraft. We're talking about the most advanced fighter jet in the world. The F-35 isn't just a fast plane with missiles. It's a fifth-generation platform that works like a flying intelligence hub. It's got stealth capability that makes it nearly invisible to conventional radar, sensors that can detect threats hundreds of miles away, and a data sharing system that lets it coordinate in real time with other aircraft and ships. Deploying these jets marks a massive escalation of U.S. military presence in the Caribbean. To put it in perspective, it's like dropping the world's best chess players into a game that, until now, was being played by rookies. Now we get to the heart of the controversy that supposedly justified this whole military showdown. The Tren de Aragua is said to be a Venezuelan criminal organization that, according to U.S. authorities, expanded its operations into several American cities, specializing in drug trafficking, extortion, and urban violence. The name comes from Venezuela's Aragua state, where it supposedly started inside the prison system. But here we step into murky waters, where truth and political propaganda blur together in ways almost impossible to separate. On one side, U.S. officials present Tren de Aragua as a real and growing threat, responsible for crimes in places like New York, Chicago, and Miami. On the other, the Venezuelan government not only denies any connection but claims to have completely dismantled the group back in 2023. Caracas goes even further, saying Tren de Aragua is a fiction created by international media and part of a U.S.-backed plot to justify military intervention. Maduro even said that any mention of the group is part of a psychological operation aimed at demonizing Venezuela and prepping public opinion for military action. The truth about this organization remains wrapped in mystery, adding yet another layer of complexity to the conflict. It's possible that both narratives have bits of truth. Maybe a criminal group by that name did exist, but its current importance is being exaggerated for political reasons. It's also possible the group evolved beyond the Venezuelan government's control and now operates independently abroad. What we know with a bit more certainty comes from independent intelligence sources, suggesting Venezuelan criminal groups really do use Caribbean waters as a corridor for international drug trafficking. What remains uncertain is the level of organization, coordination, and, most importantly, whether these activities have official Venezuelan government backing or tolerance. The reality is that America's move raises unprecedented legal questions under international law. The Trump administration has avoided giving a clear legal justification for the strike, instead offering only a confusing mix of public explanations that raise serious doubts about the operation's legality. In international waters, the use of lethal force must be justified under very specific criteria: self-defense, a United Nations mandate, or international agreements that authorize the action. The central question here is whether fighting drug trafficking justifies using lethal force against unarmed civilians at sea. Experts point out that, traditionally, anti-drug operations involve seizing vessels, not destroying them. The choice to sink instead of capture suggests a shift in doctrine that could set a dangerous precedent for future military operations. Looking at the current moves, three main paths seem to be forming for the coming months. The diplomatic scenario would mean a gradual easing of tensions through international mediation. Countries like Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico could act as go-betweens, creating communication channels to reduce accident risks. Maduro has already hinted at being open to talks, which might leave space for negotiations. The controlled escalation scenario would include more maritime interceptions, air shows of force, and maybe smaller incidents that don't spiral into open conflict. In this case, both sides keep testing boundaries without crossing definite red lines. The catastrophic scenario could be triggered by human or technical error, a Venezuelan pilot misreading an F-35's intentions, a U.S. radar operator mistaking a civilian plane for a military one, or a communication breakdown during a close pass. Maduro has already called this the biggest threat to Venezuela in 100 years, meaning any extra incident could be taken as an act of aggression. This Caribbean situation doesn't happen in a geopolitical vacuum. Venezuela has long-standing ties with Russia and China, which could see a U.S. escalation as an opportunity to expand influence in the region. Moscow has already provided military equipment and technical advisors to Caracas in recent years, including air defense systems. The question is whether those allies are willing to turn political support into direct military backing. If Russia or China got involved, the whole strategic equation would change, turning a bilateral conflict into a crisis with global consequences. Meanwhile, U.S. allies in the region, especially Colombia and Caribbean nations, are watching nervously. They depend on both regional stability and trade with both countries, putting them in a tough diplomatic spot. Amid all this, one factor underestimated by international media, but potentially decisive in any future clash, is Venezuela's massive civilian militia mobilization. Maduro's decision to arm and train 4.5 million militiamen is way more than a simple show of political force. It's a real prep for what the Venezuelan government sees as an imminent invasion. To put that number in perspective, we're talking about a paramilitary force nearly 3 times bigger than the active U.S. Army. Sure, these militias don't have the training, gear, or coordination of professional armed forces, but their existence fundamentally changes the dynamics of any possible confrontation. A U.S. invasion or intervention wouldn't just face Venezuela's regular army, but millions of armed civilians defending their turf. This kind of popular mobilization has historical precedents. During the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and the U.S. occupation of Iraq, high-tech militaries face prolonged resistance from less equipped but highly motivated local groups. The lesson from history is clear. Technological superiority doesn't guarantee a quick or easy win when facing organized popular resistance on home ground. On top of that, Venezuela has announced plans to equip these militias with rifles and missiles, a decision that significantly raises the risks of any regional confrontation. Even if these weapons are relatively basic, mass distribution creates a scenario where any territorial occupation would become extremely costly in terms of lives and resources. The mobilization also serves internal political purposes. By prepping the population for an external conflict, Maduro manages to unify different internal factions around a common goal of national defense, potentially shoring up his political base just as he faces growing economic challenges. Amid all this military capability analysis and geopolitical strategy, one element may matter more than any weapons system or international alliance: the human factor. In high-tension situations, when fighter jets fly just hundreds of meters from warships, it's human decisions made in seconds that can decide if a show of force turns into an international tragedy. The psychology of real-time military confrontation is radically different from decision-making in air-conditioned Washington offices. Fighter pilots flying at supersonic speeds, destroyer commanders interpreting live radar data, and automated defense system operators all face massive cognitive pressure. A sudden move misread, a failed radio call, or even a sensor glitch could be the spark for incidents neither side actually wants. It gets even trickier when you realize many modern military systems run on semi-automated setups. The Aegis defense systems aboard the USS Jason Dunham, for instance, are designed to detect and intercept threats in seconds, way too little time for diplomatic consultations or political analysis. If a Venezuelan jet makes an approach the system reads as hostile, the response could be automatic and irreversible. On the Venezuelan side, F-16 and Su-30 pilots face similar pressure, but with gear that, while advanced, doesn't have the same integration and automation as U.S. systems. That creates a dangerous imbalance, while American systems can react in milliseconds. Venezuelan pilots rely more on human judgment, creating reaction time differences that could easily be misinterpreted as hesitation or preparation for attack. Military historians point out that most unintended conflicts in modern history started just like this, with operational misunderstandings that spiraled out of political control. The 1964 Gulf of Tonkin incident, which led to the U.S. escalation in Vietnam, is a textbook example of how misread military actions can have devastating historical consequences. And let's not forget, conflicts in the Caribbean have economic ripples that go way beyond military costs. The region is a vital corridor for global maritime trade, especially Venezuelan oil and agricultural products from multiple countries. Both Venezuela and Colombia have moved troops to their shared border in declared anti-trafficking ops, showing that tension is spreading beyond the seas. A prolonged escalation could affect fuel prices, shipping routes, and regional investments. Shipping companies are already starting to consider alternate routes, and maritime insurers are reassessing coverage for vessels moving through the southern Caribbean. For anyone following the situation, some signs are key to watch if you want to understand where things are headed. Extra naval deployments from either side, especially U.S. submarines or aircraft carriers, would signal serious escalation. Presidential statements with harsher language, or, alternatively, calls for dialogue, can show shifts in political stance. Also pay close attention to reactions from neighboring countries. Statements from Brazil, Colombia, and Caribbean nations can either amplify or ease tensions. The speed at which information spreads and gets interpreted by media and social networks also directly impacts public perception and, in turn, political pressure on leaders. What started as a drug trafficking operation has now turned into a military show of force that could redefine power relations in the Caribbean. The mix of public security and geopolitical rivalry transformed a police action into a potential international conflict. The next stage depends mostly on whether both governments can keep communication channels open and correctly read the other side's intentions. In an environment where F-16s buzz missile-armed destroyers and F-35s patrol Caribbean skies, the margin for misunderstandings is razor-thin. This story is far from over. The next moves, diplomatic or military, will decide if we're looking at a temporary crisis or the start of a new era of military tension in the Western Hemisphere. What we do know for sure is that Caribbean waters, usually famous for beauty and calm, have now become one of the most closely watched and dangerous spots on the planet. Keep your eyes open, compare different sources, and most importantly, pay attention to the hard facts beneath the political rhetoric. History is being written right now, in real time, and its consequences could last for decades.